What happens when you make the decision to stop gambling? What happens when you finally decide to choose life, not gambling? Firstly, before I go into that, I want to say thank you to everyone. I've been blown away by the support for me, but there's also the support for each other and for the community we've got here off the back of my last video. If you haven't seen it already, watch that one before this. It's called Choose Life. It will be the one before this one. But it seemed to resonate with so many people, and so many people have gone to the comment section and shared their experiences, shared their stories. And the overview of this video is basically me talking about the long-term fallout and the long-term effects that having a gambling addiction for years and years and years has had on my life as a whole. I spoke many times in that video about how quitting gambling and getting into recovery, if you choose to call it that, is the best thing you can do to improve the rest of your life. However, the fallout of that video was that not everything can be repaired, and I spoke about my own personal experiences and also my own personal and sometimes painful regrets of the things that gambling addiction and years of wasted life have actually taken from me, the options and the opportunities. And that was the basis of that. And what I want to talk about in today's video is what happens when you make that decision, when you initially decide, right, enough is enough, I'm going to stop this, and I am going to improve the rest of my life. And I will put out the caveat, which I always do, which is the best thing you can do. Very quickly though, firstly I'll apologise for my voice. I'm still a bit ill, but wanted to make this follow-up video. The reason I'm putting this one out rather than the sort of planned crypto casino videos is because that last one really did seem to inspire people and really did seem to help in a way that a more generic video about crypto casinos and streamers, which is still coming, but in a more effective way than that sort of video ever could. I do hope you're keeping safe, and I hope you're keeping sane. Thank you to everyone who continues to support the channel in whatever capacity that might be that subscribing if you're not already, liking, commenting, getting involved in the conversation, sharing. I don't know, what else do YouTubers ask you to do? I don't know. And if you want to support the channel, help me reach more people, then there will be a link to my Patreon in the description below. It's very important to consider what happens immediately after you stop gambling. This is the point at which most efforts at abstinence or recovery fail. The first 3 months is the period of which failure is at its most likely. I will very quickly take an aside and say that if you get to that 3-month period, I can assure you that the hardest bit is already over, but do not get complacent. I have a number of people comment and say I'm 90 days, 3 months, whatever, free of gambling, and that is absolutely fantastic. However, and I speak from painful experience here, it is that point at which things start to get easy that you can become complacent. You feel like you've got it under control, and worst case scenario, you think that a small bet or a small gamble is not going to hurt, and then before you know it, you're back at square one. So 90 days is the hardest bit, and that's what I want to talk about today. But if you have got to that point, and it does start to feel a little bit easier and a little bit like, yeah, I can do this, then please don't get complacent, because that is when the urges will find you at your weakest and they will worm their way back in. And before you know it, you're back to square one. So let's talk about what happens when you quit gambling. Now, I've spoken a lot about the gambling hangover. And this is the immediate impact of a particularly disastrous session of gambling. And that could be a massive financial loss. It could also be something that has happened in your life as a direct result of a particularly bad experience with gambling. So it could be coming home late, argument with your partner, maybe you missed a day of work and you've got the sack. I don't know. Whatever it is, we experience a gambling hangover. And I would say that's a good trigger to take some action, to put proactive steps in place to stop yourself from gambling. But like a normal hangover, this fades. And this is something I've spoken about many times before. But we can liken it to a normal hangover. And what I'm going to talk about now doesn't sound like it's actually related to gambling at all. But bear with me. One of the things that I really like to do is I like to go on these adult music weekends at places like Butlins. Okay, me and a good mate of mine who's probably watching this, we had a tradition. We used to go probably a couple of times a year, then it was once a year. Now we still go, but it might be every couple of years. But basically, we go away and just have a bit of a weekend, a bit of a jolly up, basically. And if you're not familiar with Butlins, and if you're not familiar with these, that they even did these weekends, if you think of a big holiday park, big family holiday park, but for a few weekends a year, there's no kids, no Teletubbies, no Bob the Builder, no magic shows, none of that. Instead, what there is several thousand adults, half of which are in fancy dress, a lot of which are on stag do's and hen do's and pints and shots, and basically a 72-hour session with a load of cheesy 80s and 90s and 2000s bands thrown in for good measure. And it's basically a 72-hour sesh. And whilst you're probably thinking or saying out loud what my wife tells me every time I book one of these things, Phil, you're far too old for that shit. Well, you might be right, but I love it. So what happens? Well, the first day you turn up and you go out and you have a 14-hour drinking session and you go and watch S Club 3 or whatever they're down to nowadays, and then you do whatever you want to do, and then, go to bed at 4 o'clock in the morning, wake up in your digs, spent a fortune, feel like absolute rubbish, shall we say, and you have to sort of evaluate the cost of the night before, and that can be the financial cost, which invariably was going to be huge, but also the fact that you're probably sweating even though it's Skegness in November. You feel awful, you feel like you've been punched in the liver, and all the other fallouts that may occur at the hands of a particularly long session. But what do you do? Well, what you do, because you're still there for another 2 nights, is you wait till the bar opens, and then you go and chuck a few pints down your neck, hair of the dog, get back on it, and repeat this basically until you get to the Monday morning. Bear with me. Now, Monday morning, there is no more session. The bars will not open. And now you have to go back. And you have to go back to your wife, partner, whatever, who probably told you to grow up and stop doing such stupid shit in the first place. So you're going to get back. She's not going to be in the best of moods. By this point, you are physically broken. Every bit of your body aches. Your skin is yellow. Your eyes are red. You feel like you've been punched in the stomach. Feel like you've been punched in the liver. Your wallet is empty. Your credit card receipts are this long. It's all gone basically to shit. But you have to be back to work on the Tuesday, so you need to get back, you need to pull yourself together, and you need to ride out the effects of the weekend. And that might mean that you have to hit the gym really hard for a week. It might mean that you have to stay off alcohol for a couple of weeks. It might mean that you have to, buy flowers and chocolates or whatever, isn't quite so cliched, for your partner to basically get her back onto your good books, take her out for dinner, be extra nice. You have to go back to work, and maybe what you have to do is slim down your spending for a couple of months because you've had this big blowout. All right, and there is a fallout from your experience. But whilst you're there, what you do is you crack on, you continue the session, you bury your head in the sand, and you use the very thing that has made you have to experience these sort of financial implications and these physical side effects of an alcohol-induced or whatever induced hangover, all right? And what you do is you go back and use them to medicate yourself, knowing full well that come the Monday, yes, there's going to be a big fallout, but, there is a finite end to that. Now, if you apply this to gambling, this is what you have to deal with when you make the decision to choose life and not choose gambling. Right. Now imagine a sesh that lasts years, months, years. Well, firstly, if it was alcohol, you'd probably be dead. All right. But the longer you perpetuate the cycle of addiction, the longer you perpetuate these negative behaviours, then the worse the fallout at the end is going to be. In the same way that if you have one night out, it probably takes you a couple of days to get over. If you have one of these long weekends, financially and in terms of your health, it could take a couple of weeks or a month to fully recover from. If you have an addiction to gambling, then the fallout is going to be relative to how long you've been doing it. But the fallout only becomes apparent, the hangover only becomes apparent when you stop. It only becomes apparent when you stop medicating yourself, and my example was obviously alcohol and hair of the dog. But when you stop placating your urges, burying your head in the sand and escaping from your reality, disguising your reality, using the very vice, the very addiction, the very habit that has got you into the situation that you're in the first place. We talk about chasing our losses, but what we don't talk about is the fact that when we go back to gambling, we have a bad session of gambling and we lose a load of money. We're going back to it, maybe subconsciously or consciously we're going back because we want to win back the money we've lost. But realistically, what we're doing a lot of the time is we are putting off having to cope with, having to sort of mentally calculate and come to terms with the damage we've done in the session before. So rather than do that, and rather than sort of start the repair process, be that financially or because you've gone home and had a row with a wife or lost your job or whatever, rather than go about the process of repairing the damage we've done through our behaviours, we continue the same behaviour because it absents ourselves from the place that we're in. So what's the fallout of this? Well, the fallout of this is if you do choose life, the reason the first part of a recovery is the point at which the failure is most likely is because as soon as that gambling fog starts to clear, i.e. as soon as we stop self-medicating with our addiction, we stop self-medicating the fallout of gambling with more gambling, and we lose our ability to escape from reality, then what we have to do is we have to accept reality. And the longer we go without gambling, the more the fog lifts, the more realities come crashing back down on us. Some of these will be short-term, and I mean relatively short-term. Short-term financial damage, so having to wait until next payday before you can fill the cupboards up with food again. That's not a fun thing to comprehend. But some of them are going to take far, far longer to come to terms with. Gambling debt. I've spoken at length in gambling debt in previous videos. But when you actually sit down and you calculate, particularly if you had this addiction for years and years like I did, when you sit down and calculate how much money you owe to, people, loans, credit cards, paydays, blah, 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 whatever, right? When you sit down and calculate it, it would almost always be more than you expect. And that's a horrible psychological impact that only comes about when you stop gambling. And what happens when you have a horrible psychological impact as an addict? Well, you reach out to that vice, you reach out to that crutch, that addiction that probably got you there in the first place, but you reach out to it so you can escape from real life. You can escape from your reality and bury your head in the sand once again that these big problems that you've built up for yourself don't actually exist. Maybe once you decide you want to get into recovery, you then have to talk to people. Now, I've spoken at length about having to talk to people, and that can be friends, family, partners, but also it can be professionals, counsellors, all the rest of it. All right? And this can be daunting. It can be horribly daunting, particularly when it comes to coming clean to close family members, parents, or maybe your spouse, partner, girlfriend, boyfriend, illegitimate lover, whatever. All right, that can be incredibly daunting. So again, we've got the financial issues over here. We've got this need, absolute essential need to communicate over here. But rather than do that, because that's big and scary, it's better just to bury your head back in the sand and go back to the very vice that's got you with these things in the first place. We need to take stock of our lives. And I spoke in the last video about all the things that gambling has robbed me of in the long term. You have to think about the opportunities that you've foregone, and these will become clearer and clearer in your head the further you get away from gambling, because you're not constantly placating and satiating these urges, distancing yourself from your own reality. You are having to embrace your own reality, and your own reality, in all honesty, could be fucking horrible because of the position you've put yourself in. But dare I say that it's not going to get any less fucking horrible just by distancing yourself from it, by continuing to gamble, continuing to escape from the very things that you have to now cope with. I will forever have regrets. I've spoken about them at length in the last video, but it's not just the regrets of opportunities missed. It's the regrets of things I've done. Not necessarily things I can't do. I spoke about not having kids, or maybe I could be further on in my career or whatever. All right, but also things you've done in the past, all those horrible experiences, all those times that you let people down, that you let yourself down, that you missed out on things that were happening in the here and now, not future opportunities, but events, occasions, celebrations where you weren't present either physically or psychologically because of your gambling. And all these regrets will pile up, and they will become more and more and more vivid the more the gambling fog lifts. But this is an essential part of it. This is an essential stage. If you just continue to try and push these things away, and you can, right, through gambling, but also through other addictions. This is why, people talk about having an addictive personality, and I've spoken about that before, but a lot of the time, the reason we have a supposed addictive personality, and I'm dubious about that, is because, say, you quit gambling, you have all these things in life that either you have to physically deal with, like dealing with debt, or you have to deal with in terms of communication, but also you have to deal with internally, regrets and hatred for the past version of yourself, and forgiving yourself, and all these things which are really difficult. So, maybe you can abstain from gambling. Maybe you don't want to go back to gambling, so maybe start sort of drinking as another form of escapism to push these things out of your head. But eventually you have to pick up on them. You have to deal with them. And it's hard, man. It's really hard at times. And times you don't want to. Times you just think, fuck it. I don't want to do this. And you get back into that nihilist, that defeatist mind state. And I did that many, many times, where you just think, you know what? This is me. Maybe this is me. Maybe this is all I am. Maybe this is all I'm destined to be. And I'm not going to get all airy-fairy and hippie about it, but you can be destined for better things, trust me. But you can convince yourself that all you're destined to be is, a loser, a gambler, someone who's down and out, someone who is always going to be perpetually skint, perpetually lying, perpetually letting yourself and others down. This is who you are. What's the point in life? I don't care if it's killing me. And I've told myself that before. I don't care if this kills me because that's all I am anyway. So what does it matter? All right. And this will be at its absolute worst when you decide you're going to choose life over gambling. It's not that your life has got worse. Your life is actually on the path to getting better. And the only way it will get better is because when you stop gambling. But it will feel worse. It will feel a lot worse. And it will feel a lot worse because for the first time in however long it's been, you have to face these things. And you can't self-medicate with the very addiction that's caused all these things in the first place. And they are hard. And some things will keep you awake at night. Memories of stuff that you've done. Worrying about how you're going to actually start to deal with this mountain of debt you've got, which can be dealt with, by the way. But also the things you've lost, the people you've lost, and having to talk to some people who you might be on the verge of losing, and actually dealing with the fallout of those conversations, which can be just as testing. But choosing life is the only way. And rest assured that things do eventually get better, but they initially, in the short term, they will feel worse. But I assure you, and I promise you this, they are not worse. All it is you are becoming aware of them. You are conscious for the first time in a long time. And unfortunately, the conscious brain is the problem-solving bit of your brain. And that's the bit that now has to pick up the pieces. And it could be months, it could be years, it could be decades of damage that you've done to yourself. All right, but you need that conscious brain to pick up the pieces. So you need to stay on the right tracks. And that is where the practical blocks come in place. I'm not going to go back through all those, but just know that if you've made that decision to choose life over gambling, things may feel worse to start with. All right. Now, I feel like I've probably gone off on one. I've pretty much lost the last of my voice, so I'm going to have to leave it there. There may even be a part 3, because I'm sure there's things I wanted to talk about that I've not managed. But this video's gone on long enough. Stay safe, stay sane. Thank you to everyone for the support. Thank you for the overwhelming, sharing of experiences and advice and stuff that you guys are doing in our community we've got here. It's amazing. It's beyond what I ever expected it to be. And if you want to continue to help it grow, there'll be a Patreon link in the description below. I will warn you, there's not a lot over there, but it's just your way of saying thanks. Take care, and I'll speak to you all soon. All the best, guys.